I didn't say a word when she called me useless. I didn't argue when my son stood there and let her do it. I just looked at the two of them, nodded once, and walked upstairs to pack a bag. That was the moment my daughter-in-law decided she'd won. She hadn't. My name is Gordon. I'm 67 years old, retired from 31 years working at a regional logistics company in Ohio, started loading trucks, ended up as operations director. Not glamorous. Not the kind of career that gets you on magazine covers. But I raised my son on that salary, put him through college, and paid off a house that I'd owned outright since 2009. That house. That's what this whole thing is really about. It's a 4-bedroom on a quiet street in Westerville. Nothing fancy. Vinyl siding, 2-car garage, big backyard with a maple tree. My late wife Sandra planted the year we moved in. She died 11 years ago. Breast cancer. After that, it was just me in the house and the maple tree, and eventually my son Connor moving back in after his divorce. I didn't mind. Connor was in a rough spot. He'd lost the apartment he shared with his ex, needed somewhere to land. I told him he could stay as long as he needed. That's what you do for your kids. What I didn't fully account for was Teresa. He met her about 8 months after he moved back in. She was 34, worked in marketing, drove a brand new Audi she was clearly still paying off. She was polished in the way that certain people are polished. The kind where everything looks expensive and nothing feels warm. But Connor was happy, genuinely happy, and I kept my mouth shut. They dated for a year, got engaged. Then Teresa started coming around the house more, and that's when things began to shift. It started small. Little comments. Gordon, you really should update this kitchen. This tile is so dated. Or she'd walk through the living room and say something like, has this carpet always been this color? Like she was the host and I was the guest. I let it go. I figured she was just one of those people who redecorates in her head everywhere she goes. But then Connor proposed moving the wedding up, and suddenly Teresa had a new idea. Her parents, Ted and Lorraine, were getting older, 68 and 71. They lived in a condo in Scottsdale, Arizona, but Lorraine had been having some knee trouble, and they wanted to be closer to Connor and Teresa. Teresa said it made sense for them to move in with the newlyweds. Here's what she actually meant. She wanted them to move into my house. She came to me one Sunday afternoon, sat down at my kitchen table like she was chairing a board meeting, and laid it out. Her parents needed the downstairs bedroom, the one closest to the bathroom, because of Lorraine's mobility issues. Connor and Teresa would take the master. That left the 2 smaller upstairs rooms. One would be a home office for Teresa's remote work, which left 1 room for me. I didn't say anything right away. I let her finish. Then I asked her, quietly, whose house this was. She smiled the way people smile when they think you're being slow. Gordon, we're family now. This is going to be our home, all of us together. Then she added, and I want you to understand, she said this pleasantly, the way you'd suggest someone try a new restaurant. Actually, there's a really lovely assisted living community about 20 minutes from here. Connor and I looked it up. You'd have your own space, activities, people your age. I think you'd really thrive there. I was 66 years old. I mowed my own lawn. I drove myself to the gym 3 times a week. I had just finished building a workbench in my garage. I said I'd think about it. What I didn't tell her was that I'd already started making phone calls. The thing about Teresa was that she'd made a very specific assumption about me. She saw a quiet, older man in a flannel shirt who drove a 2017 pickup truck and didn't talk much at dinner parties. She saw the dated kitchen tile and the older furniture, and she calculated, wrong, that I was a man of modest means, scraping by on Social Security. She didn't know about Sandra's life insurance. She didn't know about the 401k I'd maxed out for 20 years. She didn't know about the investment account my brother-in-law had helped me set up back in 2004 that had done very, very well. She didn't know that I owned the house with 0 mortgage and had never once mentioned the number in my bank account to anyone, including Connor, my financial advisor. A woman named Pauline I'd worked with for 15 years once told me the best financial privacy strategy is simple. Never tell people what you have. Not your kids, not your neighbors, not anyone who doesn't need to know. I'd always followed that advice. Teresa thought she was solving a real estate problem. She was actually walking into something she hadn't seen coming. After that Sunday conversation, I called Pauline. Then I called a real estate attorney named Douglas who'd handled some property matters for a colleague of mine. Then I called my old friend Victor, who I'd known since we worked the loading dock together in 1988, and who now ran a small property management company. Victor had a client, a young couple, both teachers, looking to buy in Westerville. They'd been outbid twice in the past year and were getting tired of the search. I met them at Victor's office on a Wednesday morning. Nice couple, the kind of people you could see putting a tire swing on that maple tree. We shook hands on a number, a fair number, a very good number actually, for both sides. Douglas drew up the paperwork. We set a closing date, 8 weeks out. I didn't say anything to Connor or Teresa. They were busy planning a wedding. I was busy planning the rest of my life. Meanwhile, Teresa moved forward like everything was already decided. About 2 weeks after our kitchen table conversation, she told me Ted and Lorraine had booked their flights from Scottsdale. She showed me a mood board on her phone for how she wanted to refresh the downstairs. She'd already picked out paint colors. I listened. I nodded. I said mm-mm at the right moments. Connor pulled me aside one evening when Teresa was out. He looked uncomfortable, which he should have been. He said he hoped I understood that this was a practical arrangement and that they weren't trying to push me out. He said the assisted living place really did have good reviews. I looked at my son who'd grown up in this house, who I'd taught to drive in this driveway, whose mother was buried 20 miles away, and I said, Connor, I want you to be happy. I really do. So let's just see how things unfold. He seemed relieved. He thought that meant I was softening. I wasn't softening. 3 weeks before closing, Teresa organized what she called a family dinner. Ted and Lorraine had already arrived. They were staying in a hotel nearby and coming over most evenings. Teresa had started bringing over boxes of her things. She'd asked me casually if I could move some of my tools out of the second garage bay to make room for storage. I moved them into the storage unit I'd already rented. That night at dinner, Teresa raised a glass and said they were so grateful to be building a life here, in this home, together. Ted gave a little speech about family being everything. Lorraine said the house had such wonderful bones. Connor squeezed Teresa's hand. Nobody asked me how I felt about any of it. I ate my pot roast. I asked Lorraine how her knee was doing. I told Ted about a good fishing spot about 40 miles north that Victor had shown me years ago. I was perfectly pleasant. After they left and Connor had gone to bed, I sat in my living room in the dark for a while, looking at the maple tree through the window. Sandra had planted it as a sapling. It was 40 feet tall now. I thought about her a lot that week. She'd been the talker in our marriage, the one who'd have sat Teresa down and said what needed saying. I was always the one who worked quietly and showed results later. We balanced each other. Without her, I'd just gotten quieter. But quiet isn't the same as weak. That's what Teresa never understood. Closing day was on a Thursday. I signed the papers at Douglas's office that morning, shook hands with the buyers, the young couple, Scott and Megan, and handed over the keys. Victor had already drawn up a standard 30-day vacate notice for the current occupants. That evening, Connor and Teresa had invited some friends over. A casual dinner, nothing formal. Ted and Lorraine were there. A couple Teresa knew from work. It was the first real gathering at the house since the wedding planning had kicked into high gear. Teresa had started to treat it like her home months before she had any right to. I arrived at 7:15. The driveway had a few extra cars. I could hear music and voices from the porch. I walked inside. Connor saw me first and looked surprised. I think he'd expected me to be upstairs, out of the way. Teresa was in the kitchen with her friends and she glanced over, smiled her polished smile, and went back to her conversation. I walked into the kitchen and I stood next to my son. I said, Connor, there's something I need to tell you, and I'd rather tell you now than have you find out another way. He looked at me with that expression fathers recognize, the one where your kid suddenly looks like they're 12 years old again and they've realized they're in trouble, but don't know why yet. I said, I sold the house. Silence. Teresa turned around. I said it again, plainly. I sold the house. Closing was this morning. The new owners are a young couple, Scott and Megan. They're very nice. Victor's company will be managing the transition. You'll each receive formal 30-day notice, which means you have until, and I told them the date. The kitchen got very quiet. Somewhere in the living room, someone laughed at something, not knowing. Teresa said, "What?" I said, "The house is sold. It was my house to sell. It's been my house since 1998. She said, "You can't, Connor. Tell him he can't." Connor wasn't saying anything. He was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was a teenager, when things didn't go the way he expected, and he hadn't yet learned how to hide it. I said, "I want you both to know I don't have any hard feelings. I've already found a place, a nice condo over in New Albany, 1 floor, good light. I move in 2 weeks." I paused. "I hope you two find something good. The market's decent right now. Victor might be able to help if you want to rent first." Ted started to say something from the doorway. I looked at him, not unkindly, just steadily, and he stopped. I said goodnight to everyone. I set the vacate notices on the counter, folded neatly. I hugged my son, which he didn't know how to respond to, and I left. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a minute before I pulled out. I could see the maple tree in the side yard, lit up by the neighbor's motion light. I thought about taking a photo of it. I didn't. Some things you just carry. Victor called me the next morning to let me know Teresa had called him the night before, then twice more by 8 a.m. He said she'd been emphatic. He said he'd been calm and professional and referred her to Douglas's office if she had legal questions, which he said she was welcome to pursue. Since there was nothing to pursue, the house had been mine. The sale was clean. The paperwork was airtight. I poured my coffee and watched the morning news. Connor called that afternoon. He was quiet on the phone, quieter than I'd heard him in years. He asked me why I hadn't told him earlier. I said honestly that I'd tried to have a straightforward conversation about the house weeks ago, and what I'd gotten instead was a PowerPoint presentation about assisted living communities. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Dad, I should have handled that better." I told him I knew. I told him I loved him. I told him that if he and Teresa needed a reference from a good realtor to find their own place, I was happy to pass along a name. No sarcasm in it. I meant it. He almost laughed. Almost. The condo in New Albany is on the 2nd floor, facing east. I drink my coffee in the morning light, and I can see a part from my kitchen window. There's no maple tree, but I brought Sandra's garden stones with me, the ones she'd painted herself, and they're on my small balcony now, next to a potted rosemary plant that Pauline gave me as a housewarming gift. I've been here 4 months. Connor comes by about once a month. Just him, usually, without Teresa. We watch football. We eat takeout. We don't talk much about what happened, but we talk more than we have in years, which is something. Teresa and her parents found a rental in Gahana. I know this because Connor mentioned it, not because I asked. I genuinely hope it works out for them. I'm not angry at Teresa. She made assumptions about a man she'd misjudged, and she acted on those assumptions, and life corrected her. That's not tragedy. That's just what happens when you move too fast and listen too little. Ted stopped by once, unannounced. I'd run into him in a parking lot near Connor's gym. He looked uncomfortable. He said he owed me an apology. I told him he didn't owe me anything, that I understood wanting to look out for your daughter. He nodded. We talked about fishing for a few minutes, which neither of us had planned on, and then we shook hands and went our separate ways. I've been thinking lately about something an old co-worker told me years ago, back when I was maybe 35 and going through a rough patch. He said, "Gordon, the guys who make the most noise are never the ones you need to worry about. It's the quiet ones that move things." He meant it about the loading dock. There was a foreman who micromanaged loudly, and a floor supervisor who barely spoke and somehow got twice as much done. But I've thought about it a lot since. I never needed anyone to know what I had, what I'd built, what I was capable of. The house was mine. The plan was mine. The patience was mine. Teresa saw a quiet old man in a flannel shirt and made her calculations. She just made them wrong. People ask me sometimes. My neighbor here in the building, an older woman named Frances who brings me tomatoes from her garden in the summer. They ask if I regret not speaking up sooner, not making the fight more visible. I think about it honestly. Maybe there's a version of this where I sit Connor down early and have the hard conversation, where things unfold differently, where Teresa never gets that far. Maybe that's the better version. But I also know myself. I'm not built for ultimatums and kitchen table confrontations. I'm built for patience and paperwork and shaking hands with attorneys on Wednesday mornings. Sandra always said I was the kind of man who let situations complete themselves, and she meant it as a compliment most of the time. The house found good people. Scott and Megan sent me a card after they moved in. Victor passed it along. They said they loved the maple tree. They said the backyard was perfect. They said thank you. I read it twice, folded it, put it on my desk. That felt like the right ending. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, not to replay it with anger. I'm past that. But to actually understand what the whole thing was about, underneath all the paperwork and the dinner parties and the awkward phone calls. Here's what I keep coming back to. Teresa wasn't a bad person. She was an impatient one, and impatience, when it goes unchecked, makes people reach for things that aren't theirs yet and act like the reaching itself is enough to make it so. She saw a house she wanted for her family. She saw a quiet, older man she'd misjudged, and she moved fast, the way people move when they've already decided the outcome and just need the other person to accept it. What she didn't account for was that I'd spent 31 years in logistics. My whole career was about knowing what you have, knowing where it's going, and never letting anyone rush you into a handoff you weren't ready for. I didn't learn patience from a book. I learned it from decades of watching what happens when people skip steps. There's something I've come to believe, not because anyone told me, but because I've lived long enough to watch it play out over and over. How you treat people when you think they can't push back is exactly who you are. Teresa assumed I was too old, too quiet, too simple to do anything but comply. That assumption wasn't just wrong, it was the thing that undid her. She stopped paying attention because she thought she'd already won. And the moment you stop paying attention is the moment things start moving without you. Connor is learning that too, I think. He's a good man who lets someone else's certainty replace his own judgment for a while. That happens. What matters is whether you eventually find your way back to yourself. He's getting there. I can hear it in the way he talks now, more careful, more present. We don't need to rehash everything. We just keep showing up for each other, and that's enough. As for me, I'm not angry. I'm genuinely not. I have a condo with good morning light, a neighbour who brings me tomatoes in August, and a balcony with Sandra's garden stones on it. I have a son who comes by once a month and sits with me through a football game without needing to fill the silence. That's a life. That's actually a very good life. What I want people to take from this, if they take anything, is that your real strength is never the thing other people can see. It's not your truck or your flannel shirt or whether you've updated your kitchen tile. It's what you've built quietly over decades, your integrity, your patience, your willingness to do the hard, undramatic work of planning ahead and holding your ground without making a scene. Nobody can take that from you, and nobody can calculate around it if they don't know it's there. Teresa made her calculations. She just didn't have all the numbers.